us better to look at these things, sir. Housing. There was a housing minister in Barbados, the Minister of Housing in Barbados. And if you look at the reports, there was a view expressed that some of the government's money was used to build the private houses of the minister. And they challenge anybody in here or in this country to deny that. Because during the day at school, I used to be interrupted with the saw and the hammer in the backyard of Melbourne. So don't come now and tell me that your hands are so clean. And that was one of the scandals all over the place. And the minister of government was also a house seller, sold house, built them and sold them. And I remember standing up in the schoolyard one evening. This is what I saw, sir. And one man was not paid. And he was told to leave the premises, having worked for a whole week. And the man stood up in the ministry, in the yard, and he cried because he had nothing to take home to his family. So don't come in here, sir, and believe that everything was so well and good under you. Remember Haynesville, sir? That means the people at Haynesville were promised the land, promised their units, that they were in bad conditions. And even so, even though there were promised, the deeds were not drawn up for them. Just stick to your record, but don't come now to make it seem as though that your hands are so clean. We talk about land and housing. Do you remember, sir, the $500 million that was supposed to be spent on, was Andrew, the one at St. Joseph? Is Andrews? The Andrews factory. Do we remember the $500 million that was supposed to be spent on that? Where is Andrews? Where is the factory? Where is the thing to make the tambourine? Inserted all of that. Where is that money? And we are talking the river tamarins that they were supposed to convert into animal feed. So if you come in here, sir, and you want to talk facts, let us talk facts. But don't tell me that your hands are now, so you have washed your robes in the blood of the Lamb, and you're so innocent. Not you, sir. I'm talking about persons who are talking about these things. Mr. President, sir, I wish that when it comes to these things, that we can deal with all of these matters dispassionately. I may have been impassioned myself because of the route that I heard going down here by the honorable senators from the opposition. And you know how it is with figures, sir. We know with these things. But when you take up on truth and make them facts, it reminds me of Jesus before Pilate. What is truth? And the reason why I spoke on this issue and I spoke like this, because when those of us who know the truth do not speak up, dire consequences follow. And if we do not speak up, sir, there could be a crucifixion without a resurrection. And I'm saying, sir, that it is okay to want to make a point, but don't bring your own facts or bring your own opinion and pass them on as facts. Otherwise, we're not only misleading the House, we are misleading the country as a whole. I believe, sir, that I think I'll speak on this later in the day, the other point, but we must understand, we must really ask and look at our housing policy, though. We must look at it. Because we must ask ourselves, if our young people really want to invest in housing, because many of our young people these days I don't want to say they're not committed to a country or our country, but they're young people, and I taught, say, for 30-odd years, and I listened to them. They're not, some of them said they're not really interested in buying a house. And I mentioned the grandchildren, they'd be like coming up later. Because they want to up and go wherever they see a job. Wherever they see a job. So we have to, first in our mind, if we want to look at housing, first, who do we want the houses for? And what type? I've heard all sorts of things here this morning. What type? And for whom? And I believe, sir, that in my short life on this earth, I've seen things come and go. I've seen life at its best, and I've seen it at its worst. But however I see that life, I always commit myself, one, to speak truthfully to people, but at the same time, sir, I always commit myself to ensuring that people, that we have a better life for our people. I am much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Reverend Morris. Senator Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers.
Brown John. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just rise for a brief moment to speak to this resolution. I do not think that there's anything to oppose in the resolution, but I think as we gather this today on the cusp of the 50th anniversary of our nation's independence and its 3rd anniversary as a republic, this particular resolution gives us an opportunity to do some introspection in terms of what are our goals as a people in this instance where housing is concerned. So I left this island in 1976 and returned in 1987 and has been here ever since. And for as long as I can remember, administration after administration has been discussing housing. When it wasn't hardwood, it was honeybee, it was all kinds of solutions. We have steel framed, everything. And today's discussion has been reflective of that. I do agree with Senator Walters when he said this is not a BRD scenario. And I would hope that it wouldn't be a BRD scenario, but in listening to the discussion this morning, all we've heard is accusation of one administration after another, and who built what and how many they built. And at the end of the day, none have really come up with a meaningful solution. And it causes me to go back to something I would have said in this honorable chamber some time ago, sir, that we're too small a nation to be trying to turn around the ship every time an administration comes to power. We need to have a national plan, and I believe we need to have a national housing plan, the type of housing we will invest in, and administrations become elected to manage the plan. But we cannot be going one after the other. Every time an administration changes, we just decide, well, I like how these things look, let's do that, or I like this plan. Because in reality, later on today, we'll discuss the Barbados population policy, and this particular piece of legislation actually counters something in the Barbados population policy. Because in the Barbados population policy, I don't want to reveal too much about it because we're going to discuss it later, actually has as one of its solutions to control the population so that there's space, there's sufficient green space left. Now, let's look at the proposal here. We're proposing 10,000 homes in 5 years, as rightly we have not been told what type of homes they will be. But let us just assume that you're talking about building on and making sure people have access to a piece of the rock. The average small house spot is 3,000 square feet, roughly. If you put 10,000 homes on 3,000 square feet, that's 30 million square feet. An acre is about 40,000 square feet, so that's about 750 acres, which is just over 1 square mile. So in 5 years, you've taken up 1 square mile of 166. And it will not be one, it will be more than that. I believe that the time has come when we should look at a national policy. I've said it before, and we have to invest in high-rise buildings. We have the Grotto, that's a good example. I had the opportunity to visit them. I have seen London-born towers, even though that's not so much high-rise, but this is where we need to go. It may mean reorienting the mindset of our people in terms of what we call home. But the reality is that we have to look at where the country is going and what our development plan will be for the next 25 to 30 years. I've said we cannot keep making 3-year plans. And that seems to be, the whole discussion here today has been about 3-year plans. Somebody will get in and say the steel frame houses were not good enough, so we're going to do it something else. And before you know it, we've spent millions of dollars again on nothing. I think this gives us the opportunity on the eve of our independence to think seriously about what we are going to do for this country that we call home. What contribution we're going to make as the parliament of this country right now. And it certainly cannot be more of the same. It cannot be more of the same. Now, we've discussed houses here and we're building these houses, but when last, and this is just a question, when last has a real low-income house been built in Barbados? But we'll have to determine what is low income. But I know half of these houses that are being produced, there are a lot of people can't afford them. And there's a reason they cannot afford them. Because the price of land in Barbados skyrocketed in the late 90s, early 2000s. So even you can put the cheapest house on a piece of land in Barbados, it's going to be expensive. It's going to be out of the price range of some people, of the very low income people that we're trying to help. And so perhaps if we go into the more high-rise type buildings, it cuts out that cost of land that the individual person will have to pay. And perhaps will make things a little more affordable for the people who desperately need housing in this country. But we certainly cannot go on, because if we continue like this, we can leave this parliament and come back 25 years later and they'll still be arguing about the same thing. We are too small. Look, in the last few days I've had had reason to reflect on democracy and how good a system it is. Democracy is the fairest system, I believe, that we have for choosing our government. It's government of the people, for the people, by the people. But because a government is democratically elected, doesn't mean it's just. Doesn't mean its intentions will be virtuous. And all democracy means is that the government that is elected, the majority of people who voted think like that government. And it only means the majority of people who participated in the election. So you can actually have a democratically elected government that is a minority of the electorate. And that's why I've said, and I'm not speaking about our current situation, I'm just saying, going down the road, if we come together as a people, and this is the 58th anniversary of our independence, and say, look, We need to set a national plan for the next 30 to 50 years. Governments will change, administrations will change, but this is what it will be. This is what housing in Barbados will be like. This is what we're going to invest in. This is where the taxpayers' dollars are going to go. Such that an election just becomes an election for managers of the plan, rather than what we're seeing here. Because I've thoroughly enjoyed the discussion this morning, I must say. Really, this was the first time I was actually upset that we were going for lunch. But because I was thoroughly enjoying the back and forth. But on a very serious note, as a nation, as a small nation, we have to think a little differently. And I don't think, as I've said, we don't have the type of politics that prevents us from doing this. We do not have that adversarial type politics. Everybody knows that an administration will be in today, and maybe a few years down the road, another one will be in. We accept that. That's how it is. And so I believe that we can make that decision now as a people and say, this is where we want to go. And it will be a holistic approach. So we're talking housing now, but it will deal with agriculture, it will deal with all the other things that we have to deal with. But what will happen is that we will know that going forward, when we elect a government, we don't have to worry about whether somebody at their whims and fancy went somewhere and saw a nice looking house and said, I should get some of them for Barbados. And then before you know it, we spend millions of dollars. They come and you can't get anybody to put them up because they didn't come with the instructions. And all those kinds of things. So we have to get, I believe, sir, we have to get very serious about ourselves. The world, though it's becoming smaller through technology, larger nations are becoming more isolationist. And we have to make sure that we build resilience here in our little pockets of the world. And the best way we can ensure that we build this resilience is that we have a national plan and we know what our goals are as a people, politics aside, so that when the storms of this world confront us, we are all singing on the same page because we know what our national goals are. And so, yes, I support the resolution because there's no reason not to. But I just implore us to do the type of reflection necessary at this time and endeavor to make the type of plans that will make Barbados better for all of us and for the future generations to come. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator the Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers. Senator King.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I shan't be long on this, but I think it is important, as was stated by Senator Rogers, all the politics aside, we begin to focus on what is the real problem. The real problem is housing, a lack of housing. This is a problem that not only Barbados faces, countries all over the world, large and small, have the same problem. But human beings from millennia have always wanted two major things: food and shelter. Food and shelter. Two major things. And those two things will collide at some point in time, especially if you are living in small land spaces. Mr. President, I've listened carefully to members on the other side talk about food security, and in fact, in another place, I heard reference to us building concrete, putting concrete where we should be plowing lands. No, sir, I don't think any of us in this room are unaware of what has become almost folklore in Barbados, Hurricane Janet, and the devastation that would have caused to the housing stock at that particular point in time. A lot of chattel houses, wooden houses. If we're expecting now with climate change that you have to build sustainable and more resilient types of homes, it means, just to counter what was said, that you're going to have to use concrete. You can't go back to building how you used to build, especially when all of the science is saying that the hurricanes are going to be a lot more powerful than what we've experienced in the past. I mean, this is a simple, common sense thing that you need to do. If you're going to be building then and using more steel and more concrete, the cost of the building will naturally go up because the cost of producing those things have also gone up. And during 2021, 2022, you had a problem where shipping costs went up, which means that passing on to those persons buying steel, buying concrete, buying things was added monies. It would get reflected in what you termed as overruns and different things because the prices were inflated again. No, hold on. Because it's easy to come in here and just say, oh, the prices went up and there are overruns without putting it into context. No, I'm not saying that all of it is related to that, but you have to bring in all of the factors that will contribute to that when the statement is done. The Auditor General is not going to put in the book that says they went up because of these factors. He's going to state that it went up. But we have to be able, as was mentioned earlier, to speak fairly. I ain't going to say truth because I've learned from my grandparents that in Barbados there are a number of people who are strangers to the truth. And so therefore I would deal more with fear rather than truth, because that gives some people a lot of problems. But we have to be fair when we're dealing with these issues. Mr. President, there is, if one takes a look across, just across the world in North America, a huge housing problem in California, where you are finding more and more persons are living on the streets. In Barbados, for a number of years now, we've also had a problem where the young gentleman, the name doesn't catch me now, but he has been complaining for a number of times, Mr. Safri, that's the name, that more and more people are coming onto the streets. Now, this speaks to another problem that oftentimes we don't talk about, and that is the abandonment of persons by their families and other things. Now, you can't blame any particular person for that, but it is a reality that we face, which means that government, in its quest to house as many of these persons who can't qualify for financing, it has to find lands from somewhere to do it. And if we are going to be honest, Barbados, in its heyday as a part of the British Empire, was one huge plantation. There was no land that you couldn't say wasn't agricultural land except the houses that the people who ran the plantations lived in. Everywhere else was agricultural land. So that as things change, and we are now the ones responsible for building homes, those people prior to that didn't have to build any homes for anyone. So they could have as much agricultural land as humanly possible. We don't have that luxury today. We have to be cognizant of the kind of messaging that we send out there when we are trying to score political points. Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with human beings. And if you either incite them or cause them to lose hope in their own existence, you're doing them a disservice. You're doing them a disservice. And if you're hoping to form the next government at some point in time, you have to begin to think about doing them a service and not a disservice. So while we can in here, none of us in here, none of us don't know what it is to be homeless. Not one. But there are people out there who know it and know it well. And in my days as a social worker, I can tell you, I walked the length and breadth of this country in places that I used to think that I was probably one of the poorest people in Barbados until I started that work. And I began to see with different eyes the dire straits that happens. And it's not any government's fault. It's just that in some instances, some persons, families from one generation to the next cannot help themselves. And the only recourse they have is for government to be helping them. I want to go back to something that was said in here earlier, especially in the 90s, because for me that was an interesting period in Barbados' development. Someone made the point that under this administration, a lot of houses were not built. I dare to tell you that under this administration, in that particular time, because I study it well, because I had to write songs about it, I had to study it, that there was a building boom where more people were in developing lands and building homes than we've ever seen, ever.
Yeah.
Ever. And at that particular time, if you measured what government was doing in terms of building homes, the numbers should be down because there were a lot more players involved. But what the government did, they created something called Barbados Mortgage Finance. That even when it first, people calling me and asking me as a Calypsonian, come and get yourself sorted out. So if you have that, people have access to funding. There's no need for whole 10,000 people to run to government to get it because they got the financing to go and do it, do what they need to do. So when we begin to look and criticize about how many houses government was able to build or not able to build, you got to take all these other factors into consideration. Because if you got a building boom and you have access to financing, nobody is saying now waiting on the government to build a house. They can get the financing and build their own homes. What you should do is try to find out what are the figures to show how many people had mortgages from Barbados Mortgage Finance, how many homes were built, and put that into the equation. Then we will begin to talk something a little bit more factual about what we're dealing with, and not just conjecture, so that we, like I said before, that we can score some points. A lot of other factors you got to take into consideration. But at the end of the day, Mr. President, and I'm going to wrap up now. We have to get serious about what it is we want. Because I also heard from the other side that they have a problem with steel frame houses, which is the technology. And I always say to people, if there is technology available that is going to help you to build faster, to build stronger, to be resilient, why not do it? Because if you are anti-technology, let us all then take our cell phones, our devices, and all these things, and throw them away, and go back to typing or just writing. And I'm sure that nobody in this room is going to go back to that. So you have to open your minds to advance. I understand you're trying to make a point about small players going out of the market, but the demand is such that you need to supplement it with other technologies and other things that you can do. It will not put all of those people out of work, because at the same time, I'm sure that they learned how to construct and do all the things as part of working with it. So, again, sir, this is this government's attempt to solve a problem that we have had for generations. And I think is a step in the right direction. There is no lands, and I'm going to repeat this again for all those persons who may be listening. There are no lands in Barbados that at some point in time were not agricultural lands. But if we have to find a balance between providing housing and getting food. And that is why you would notice that a number of people are no longer just farming in terms of digging up the ground. People are getting things, hydroponics, aquaponics, they're using all sorts of different things to produce food and produce a lot of food in urban spaces all across the globe. So again, using different technologies. One of the problems that the Democratic Labour Party has had for as long as I know myself, and I'm 60 years old now, is a myopic view of the world. And you cannot exist in the world with a myopic view. Because as things change, you have to be able to adapt and to make use of those things that will be beneficial to you and to know what things you need to throw away. So, Mr. President, I again just want to reiterate my full support for this resolution, and I just hope that as we build out, this lot of talk about, oh, can't build 10,000 homes and all this stuff, I want to agree with the senator who made the point. In life, you aim high. And working again, I always used to tell students that, aim high. If you aim for the stars and you only reach the sky, all you have to do is to look back and see how far you came. And with those few words, I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator King. Senator Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I won't be very long. I know that this is the evening before celebrations this weekend, and I don't intend to detain anyone for a very long period. But I just wanted to make a few brief comments. I know it cannot be easy for any government to have to balance all of the demands for land, for housing, for commercial purposes, and for all the other reasons that we require expansion of land, for recreational purposes, providing facilities for communities to congregate and so. So it's not an easy task, and any government has got to try to do their best in terms of balancing all of those demands. And I raise that issue in the light of the fact that it always seems more than ever that when there's a demand for land, it is always the agricultural land which is used and utilized for that purpose. And of course, we know that once we take land out of agriculture, it is gone out forever. And what is worrying for me, and this is not something that I've not said in here before, but I raise it again because I think it is worth repeating, is that when we had in the 2013 Physical Development Plan, Mr. President, that report identified something like 45,000 acres of land which would have been available for agriculture. We had the 2017 Physical Development Plan, which was debated in this Honorable Senate not very long ago. In fact, it may have been this year or early last or late last year. And that plan suggested that at the time only 28,000 acres of agricultural land could be identified. That is to say approximately 50% between that period, 2013 and the 2017 period, when these physical development plans were prepared, that you have lost in agriculture. Now, I don't know what the policy of the government is in terms of agriculture. I sort of heard some hints from, I believe it may have been Senator Morris, that agriculture is dead. I think that effectively he said agriculture is dead. And he also made the point that really land should be utilized in areas where it has the greatest economic value. Now, that may be, I don't know if that is a hint that the policy on agriculture of this government is, the present administration is changing. But I also note, of course, that government has invested itself.
I raise on a point of order, and I hope that the record of the Senate would make it clear. But certainly, I did not hear Senator Morris indicate that agriculture was dead or make any indication in his contribution to this honorable chamber that would suggest any indication in his mind that agriculture was dead. So I am unclear, I'm unclear, Mr. President.
But Senator Morris is present. Perhaps he may care to clarify. He has not objected.
Sir, I did say that agriculture was on the decline, and it has been so for years.
An entirely different statement. It's an inflammatory.
Please continue, Senator Nurse.
Well, look, I am not going to prolong the debate on it, but the point is that he did not sound very good tidings about agriculture. Let me put it that way, if that satisfies everybody. So, Mr. President, it is not to say that everything is going good in agriculture. We heard when this government took up the administration in 2018, we heard about medical marijuana. We thought that that was going to be the great alternative and the big area that will carry agriculture forward. That now seems to be, perhaps I shouldn't say it dead again, but you're not hearing anything about that. And it will be interested to know what is happening.
Mr. President, I rise on a point of, or perhaps a point of elucidation. I would urge the Honourable Senator to reflect that only 2 weeks ago, Barbados hosted one of the biggest medicinal marijuana conference in the region. Actually, just today, the CEO of the medicinal marijuana agency was actually awarded as one of the chief persons then being able to push for the growth. In fact, again, the record would show that Barbados has issued a number of licenses under that regime for medicinal cannabis as well. We note, Mr. President, there are problems with banking, but in fact, the sector, as I said, has issued a number of licenses. There are people operating under those licenses. And again, 2 weeks ago, major conference in Barbados to suggest that nothing is being heard about the industry, again, is seeking to mislead the chamber. Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, it's certainly good to hear that we are having conferences and that licenses are being issued. not sure though that the production is actually going on the ground. And that is really where we will know that this particular project, this initiative is taking root. That is when we will be convinced in that area. But I move on, Mr. President. What I am concerned about is the continual use of the agricultural land for these other purposes like housing and so on. I just had a look, Mr. President, at the order papers that we have had just for this year, not talking about all the others. But, you know, we had this one, we had resolution vesting of NHC land in holders, which we're now discussing. Resolution reacquisition of land at Trents. Resolution revesting of land at Pilgrim Place in Christchurch. Resolution revesting of land at Castle Grant Plantation in St. Joseph. Resolution pertaining to the compulsory acquisition of land at Work Hall in St. Philip. And we go on and we go on. And the point is that these were all lands that were at some point in agriculture. So the process is going on, and my concern is, can we get a policy from government about what are the serious plans for agriculture? Government only this year, earlier this year, I believe it was, began the process of divesting itself of the sugar industry assets. Another indication that perhaps government's main thrust is not going to be in agriculture. And we have to look at all of that in the context of the fact that food security, and we have seen within recent times the issues of food security. When we have to depend on importation of all our food from whether it be this region, whether it be farther afield, we have seen the impacts which it can have in terms of our food security issues. And therefore, I would like to hear articulated at some point a serious policy on where we are going, if we are going anywhere, or if we are giving up on agriculture. And if so, what alternatives are we looking at? I know that as you drive along the country within recent times, you see a lot of these alternative energy systems springing up on various agricultural lands. And I would hope that I have nothing against alternative energy systems. In fact, I would be one of the proponents in supporting government on seeing that sector grow and improve. But I really would like to think that as we move along, that we are not utilizing our best agricultural lands for this purpose. And so it is just to urge government to continue to be very careful in how it is utilizing the agricultural land. And we are really getting down to the stage now where we have to ask ourselves, is there still a critical, are we at the level now where we still have a critical amount of agricultural land available that agricultural can continue to be a viable sector. And so, Mr. President, one of the things that I would like to suggest, again, in the physical development plan, I think it was, which again, the 2017, we recognized, or the issue, the question was raised, that there are several developed lots, I believe, which have been transferred out of agriculture, which have had a change in use, but are still sitting idle and nothing has happened with them. And I would like to think that as we think about our housing policy, we start to look at those areas. We start to look at the city of Bridgetown again. We start to look at the areas where we have direct housing settlements and see how we can utilize that land to re-energize the whole housing sector without having to continually deplete the already scarce agricultural resources. And so while, as I said, while I understand the issues and the pressures and the demands for land for alternative uses, I would just end by by urging the government to continue to seriously manage our lands for the best of our people, and that I don't want to be driving around Barbados one day and everywhere I see buildings and houses and so on. I like to drive through the country and see some nice green areas and so on. And I hope that this will be continued as we move ahead. And with those few words, Mr. President, I am obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Cummins, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to express appreciation to all the honourable members who have spoken in this debate on this resolution. And I want to begin my wrap-up by answering one particular question. There was a question that was asked around how many houses are being built at this location. I believe that the Honourable Minister, in his very extensive presentation, would have shared that construction of 28 single units is underway at Bullens, and it is expected that by December 16th of this year, 15 of those units will be completed and ready for handover, and that by January 2025, in a month and a half or so from now, that the additional 13 units will be made available. This is information that has been shared before by the Honourable Minister with responsibility for agriculture. Now, Mr. President, in my closing, want to deal with a couple of things. I want to take the time, Mr. President, to say that there is always going to be, if we are to hear the words of Senator John King, there is always going to be an inherent tension for land use. That is a fact in a place where land is not an infinite resource. We are not Guyana. We don't have acres and acres and acres of open land and jungle and virgin territory. We are not Brazil that borders 8 countries. We are 166 square miles, and there is no scenario where there is not always going to be a tension between the different purposes for which we use land. And I want us to be very clear on that. Barbadians have, I think, one of the top public services in the region and in the world. It is populated by persons who have specialized in different disciplines, and they include planners, We have planners in this country. It's fine for politicians to stand and attempt to score political points, oftentimes cheap political points, trying to talk about what this government is not doing. But the fact of the matter is, this government does not act on its own accord. It functions on the advice of technical officials. And technical officials assess using the best technology, the best expertise, the skills, continuing professional learnings that they're doing to be able to guide the government on how to make the best use of what resources it has. A planner on any given day, Mr. President, has to make determinations about land for housing, land for schools, lands for commercial development, lands for hotel development, whether beachfront or roadside lands. It has to make determinations about lands for housing, for low-income housing, or whether it is going to be condos and villas. Every single day, planners have to negotiate those tensions between how we use lands. This is no utopia where you just have lands appearing out of nowhere that are earmarked for one thing versus the other. We're always going to battle that tension. And governments with the best technical advice available to it from its technicians should make those decisions in the interest of its people. I don't know if the notion of there being the most economic use for land is even something that on its own stands. Because, Mr. President, there are social costs, there are environmental costs, there are all kinds of physical other attributes that are typically to be considered when making a decision. And so there's more than one variable that is considered when making decisions on land use. The resolution before us speaks about a plot of land that has not been in agricultural production since the late 1980s. It has not. It does not mean, and I believe I said so in my presentation, that the activities that were being undertaken on that site were not and have not been incorporated elsewhere. I said so. The ornamental industry that we spoke about, and I'm sure I talked about anthuriums and lilies and so on, that work, those commercial activities have been integrated into the Soil Conservation Unit. The officers have been integrated into the Ministry of Agriculture, and we now have a relocation of the agricultural functions there. There will always be tension in 166 square miles for the use of land. And any attempt to make Barbadians feel otherwise is doing Barbados a disservice, and it is misleading to the people of this country. Now, I have listed how the houses are to be constructed, and I've talked about the way in which processes are used, Mr. President, in the public service to inform political decisions or policy decisions. Now, Mr. President, I want to go back to the Auditor General's reports. Now, when we cite Auditor General's reports, let's be clear, there's a difference between a cost overrun as a result of increasing shipping costs, underestimation, and an increase in cost or an Auditor General's report that speaks to mismanagement, failure to follow due process, a failure to follow the tendering process. That is a different matter than an Auditor General report that speaks about costs on their own, but does not suggest any malfeasance. There is a difference, Mr. President, and I believe one of the honorable senators made a point, and I want to go into the same Auditor General's report, speaking about the question of low-income housing. This government, when we came to office, definitely shared a concern, and I think it's a legitimate concern to be raised even now. When you are building a house or building houses for low-income owners, ostensibly, they have to be affordable to low-income earners. And that is why I pointed out that for these projects under the government's housing program, the government has sought to ensure that we, in the absence of a Barbados Mortgage Finance, and for the very purpose of making it affordable to low-income earners, that the financing mechanisms would be innovative. That's how we had the HOPE project. Homeowners homeowners producing energy, so that you're using the roof and the creation of energy to be able to subsidize the pricing. That's why we have introduced lease to own, rent to own schemes that allow you to pay rent or pay lease type sums, and then at the end of a designated period, that is converted into a property that you own. So there's more than one way to get to the final destination, and we have attempted to use those. But Mr. President, in the Auditor General report of 2016, it makes this point. On Valerie and Grotto, yes, high rises. And the government has already, in this incarnation as well, made reference to the fact that we will have to go up and that there will be a need for more high rises, and that there will be a need for us to consider duplexes, which we've already built some of, quads, which we've already built some of. If you go up White Park Road, behind the Ministry of Energy, and on the other side of the road, you'll see those already there. And yes, multi-story complexes, but multi-story complexes and high-rises, Mr. President, in places like Valerie, with multiple levels that don't even have an elevator in them, and people have to walk those stairs. That's a problem. That's a problem. So you now have to look at what the cost implications will be for building high-rises over a certain level and integrating elevator capacity, and yes, the important question of maintenance. But let me come back to this report. The NHC has indicated that housing units for low-income earners should be provided at a cost of $125,000 to $195,000. However, the construction costs of these high-rise units range from $300,000 and $450,000 per unit. Even though all of the units were built within the agreed time frame, the high cost per unit obtained within these projects would have impacted negatively on the NHC being able to provide these units to low-income earners without substantial subsidization. This is the reality of when we talk about low-income housing. It has to be affordable for low-income earners. Valerie and Grotto, by this report, were not. They were not. And the Auditor General report of 2014 says so. It goes on, if we're not clear, the corporation bases rental rates for its high-rise apartments on the construction costs of the buildings, recovered over a 35-year period. With the introduction of legislation which allows the transfer of ownership to tenants after renting for a period of more than 20 or 30 years, it is not clear why the 35-year payback period is being used. It should also be noted, in the case of Valerie high-rise apartment units, certain costs were not considered. These included the cost of land on which the units were built, which was $400,000 in the 80s, a variation cost of $630,000, an interest penalty, and at the Grotto, the cost of land, $6.766 million, and interest penalty of $784,000 were not included. So, Mr. President, low-income earners, yes, we all agree, clearly, need to be able to have access to low-income housing. That is a fact. But I want to navigate, Mr. President, the question of speed. I want to talk about speed for a minute. Mr. President, look, I believe that Senator King, when he spoke just now, he said, none of us in this room have ever been homeless, certainly not to the best of my knowledge. And I don't know everyone's personal story, but I don't think anyone here has ever been homeless. None of us have ever had our houses, our homes, where we live, where we raise our families, where we lay our head down at night, ravaged by a storm, whether it was Thomas, which we came to office and still found people unaccounted for as a result of that, whether it was Elsa, where we have had over the last little while, and I believe that the Honorable Minister of Housing in his report spoke about the number of persons who have been accounted for and accommodated under the UDC, the RDC, and the NHC as a result of Hurricane Elsa. But we've never had to experience what that looks like, or having to run for your house in the middle of a storm. Mr. President, try telling any of those people who need urgent housing that you want to wait until you build houses over the longest period of time, and you're not going to assist them by trying to find technology and solutions that will expedite the time that they will be able to get a roof over their house, their heads, Mr. President. There are some things which are urgent. There are some things which require no action. We can't sit down from our detached middle class bubbles and talk about, oh, we should allow these people to come in and build the houses when we don't have roofs over, when people don't have roofs over their houses, over their heads. That's not something that we can do as a government, Mr. President. It has to be done now, and it has to be a priority. It is the reason why, together with the Ministry of Housing and the Ministry with responsibility for people empowerment, there were persons who were accommodated immediately, whether they were accommodated in apartments, in hotels, in Mangrove, in the Labour College, whether they were accommodated in group housing, all of the arrangements that needed to be made to put people in housing on a short-term basis because of the immediacy of the situation with Hurricane Elsa. And that was what needed to happen at the time, Mr. President. The response over time, however, would then have necessitated the construction, either the repair of those houses or the provision of new houses to be able to allow those persons to live once again in dignity. And I want to share what the Minister of Housing shared in the other place when he spoke about Hurricane Elsa. He talks about over 679 repairs having been completed to date, while a total of 535 houses have been built over the corresponding period. He talked about the fact that the expenditure for those houses, both repairs and new builds, was $86 million, $148,310.82. The Honorable Minister of Housing went on to break down how the repairs and the replacement housing was done for Hurricane Elsa under the NHC. Repairs completed on the NHC were 503 houses. Under the Rural Development Commission, there were 83 houses. Under the Urban Development Commission, there were 93 houses, bringing us to a total of 679,000. So to say, Mr. President, that this government to date has not built and has not put the effort into housing and accommodating persons affected both by Hurricane Elsa and, yes, by Hurricane Thomas, tropical storm. Actually, no, Thomas was not even a hurricane. Thomas was a tropical storm. We were not even a government when Thomas passed through this country. We still found ourselves accommodating persons from Tropical Storm Thomas and those under Hurricane Elsa, Mr. President. That is the Barbados Labour Party. That is what we did, Mr. President. The RDC then went on, Mr. President, to complete 83 repairs, house repairs, at an overall cost of $3.9 million and 156 rebuilds at an overall cost of $16.5 million. The Urban Development Commission completed 93 repairs at an overall cost of $3.6 million and 133 rebuilds at $11.4 million. This is a government that should hang its head in shame on housing and a provision of support. No, Mr. President, those numbers don't support that. And so I want to say in support of the Honorable Senator, our own, we call him affectionately Nurev, but the public of Barbados, Reverend, Canon, Doctor, I never remember what your order is, but Senator Rogers, in his conversation with the nation, made several important points. And I want to take the opportunity to close on at least one of them. Mr. President, I don't know if it is possible for there to be a 25-year plan. In the energy sector alone, we have had 3-year plans and they have become outdated. They've had to evolve. Life happens, countries change, dynamic evolves, international circumstances change, costs evolve, our national circumstances may evolve. So 25-year plans are long range at best. But the idea that plans should not be made on short-term electoral cycles is something that I believe this Barbados Labour Party government certainly supports. If it is a good policy, there's nothing wrong with continuing said policy. Mr. President, I remember under the Right Honourable Oenath, there was a Barbados National Development Plan. It was actually, interestingly, a 30-year plan. There was a national development plan until 2008 when it ceased to exist in the mind of the government at the time. It was rubbished, discarded, and not seen as having any worth. But it was a policy that had been developed not just by persons who were specialists in their disciplines, but public officials who in their own right felt they had something to contribute to their country in its long-range planning. It was rubbished in 2008, never to be spoken of again. In our incarnation, you have heard me earlier today, Mr. President, say the Coverley model, for example, is something that not only did we continue, but we have replicated, and we can say that where it is justly appropriate and true. But we don't sit, Mr. President, like some do and get glee over small points that they think they have made or small digs that they think they have made, because we function in a world where facts still matter. Facts still matter. So there are some who may think that they have made some great contribution to a conversation by dwelling in half-truths, mistruths, misleading information, information that does not reflect the reality, and in some instances the disservice that is being done to the public of Barbados by not telling people what really is involved in governance over a long-range period of time. That is not mature democracy. That is not mature leadership, and we have to have honest conversations with our country. Agriculture is not dead. Today is not an agriculture debate, so I'm not going to get into the details of the agriculture sector even slightly. But agriculture is not dead, and the Minister of Agriculture, I am sure, is perfectly competent in his own right at the appropriate occasion to speak on the matter of the government's future plans for agriculture. What I can say to you is that today's housing debate has been reflective not just of what the government has intended to do at Bullins, but what the government is doing more broadly, and the government will continue to have open conversations, whether in this chamber, in the other place, via press conferences, via public statements, via press releases, and I encourage everyone to look in the authentic places for news and information on what the government's policies are. The government is not short on sharing, not short on talking. All of the information that is oftentimes asked for is there for all to see and all to be able to analyze and ask questions on. And we commit, Mr. President, to continuing to support the housing agenda of this country, which is not a Barbados Labour Party agenda alone, but it is a Barbados agenda. And that is most fitting today on the eve of November 30th. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. The question is that this resolution, order number 9, passing of resolution for the vesting of land in the National Housing Corporation at Holders Hill and Parish of St. James, do not pass. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This resolution is therefore passed.
Order number 3, sir.
Order number 3.
In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, and which has been assigned to Senator Honourable C.J. Blackman, Minister in the Ministry of Finance, and he will be moving today the passing of a resolution that Parliament of Barbados take note of the Barbados Population Policy 2023.
Senator Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me, in this late hour of the afternoon, come to you, Mr. President, and colleagues in the Senate, on a very important resolution, namely focusing on the National Population Commission. Now, this commission plays a very important role in the country's development prospects. And I start there so as to set the tone for those who are following this debate as to why this resolution is here and the importance of it going forward, not just in the ordinary context of resolutions, but as we have continued to show over the last 6 years as an administration, bringing to Parliament bills and resolutions that matter to the people of the country, not just in a 5-year cycle between elections, but policies that will transform this country long beyond the cycle of elections. And why am I saying that? This resolution today is one, I am sure, if you listen to the public discourse on population, is one where our people continue to have to treat to the issue of where is Barbados going, what will that future look like, and what are the ingredients necessary for that prosperity to rest upon. We talk about growth, we talk about development, we talk about having the requisite fiscal policy space, we talk about the climate crisis and the fight against the climate crisis, we talk about resilience, we talk about food security. All of these things are necessary cogs within the broader strategy of the long-term development of Barbados. But equally, and perhaps depending on how you see it, Mr. President, importantly, or more importantly, depending on where you want to land on the issue of the population of Barbados and the future of Barbados and the future of our population of this country is therefore an important matter as we have to now look to the future and address a number of realities and challenges and opportunities coming out of those challenges with respect to where we want our country to go. And I start on that basis, therefore, and want to remind the House and the public at large that the National Population Commission was established some 7 months after this administration would have come into office in 2018. And of course, the Cabinet would have approved this. And you may ask yourself, so what's the relevance and the importance of the Population Commission? And just by brief introduction to share with the public, one, to produce and to publish a population situation analysis, commonly known in the speak, PSA, on the size and the structure and the health and the skills of the population over the next 20 years, on the assumption that no active population policy had been there at the time. So again, you heard it in different debates, Mr. President, but notwithstanding that we had major fires to out when we first came to office in 2018, it is almost as if this administration became a firefighting entity, notwithstanding our fire service, but of course, the political speak, there were challenges that we had to confront. But notwithstanding those challenges, the government saw it fit, as we do in our typical Labour Party style and philosophy, notwithstanding the challenges that you have before you, you still have to keep your eye on the long-term prize of development. And that is why I'm happy to be part of this administration. And secondly, and importantly, the focus of the Population Commission was to develop a draft national population policy so as to be presented, of course, to Cabinet for approval, based around setting the policy goals and population goals, and targeted interventions and strategies so as to reduce the population-related impediments in achieving government's medium-term and long-term economic and social goals, including recommendations that relate to legislation. Now, at this point, before I go further into the presentation, Mr. President, with your indulgence, allow me to thank and highlight a number of persons who would have worked tirelessly, and I really want to treat to this, some of whom are here in the gallery from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment, Namely, we have with us, Mr. President, Mr. Patrick McCaskey, who is the Acting Permanent Secretary within the Ministry. We have Ms. Renelle Savory, also, who is the Acting Chief Economist. Not here with us, but equally to the task and made a significant contribution, is Ms. Carolyn Wythe, who is an economist in the Ministry. And when we look at the actual members of the Commission itself, and allow me to share with you and to the public who they were, or are rather. The Chair, Ms. Roberta Clark. The Deputy Chair, Ms. Waynell Aline Jones. Ms. Paula Bayer, Dr. Yolanda Aline, Dr. Jonathan Lashley, Dr. Madhuvanti Murphy, Mr. Pierce Rudder, Ms. Janelle Scantleberry Munzi, Mr. Jerome Wood, and Mr. Delano Scantleberry. Now, of course, the Research and Planning Unit within the Ministry of Economic Affairs serves as its secretariat, as it were. But the point I'm making is this, is that similar to what was said in a previous intervention today, Mr. President, this government, notwithstanding our vision, notwithstanding our policy pursuits, we work hand in hand, tirelessly, with technical teams who provide yeoman service under sometimes, and we know, some tough conditions. Because this government came into the administration and leadership of the country with a pursuit of delivering for the people of Barbados. And I want to take this opportunity to commend again the Permanent Secretary and the Chief Economist and all of our team in Economic Affairs, and to the commissioners who made themselves available to serve in helping this country to navigate the way forward on this critical and important matter. And I want to say that where we are today is not any fly-by-night or two-morning process. There were a number of consultations, consultation after consultation, which provided the backdrop for us as policymakers and those in the ministry to really see what are the issues, what are the frameworks necessary, what is the roadmap that we will need to go in really unpacking these issues. And some of the issues that came up and that we're focused on, of course, we looked at the socio-economic and labor force dimensions of population dynamics. We also took the opportunity, and those consultations yielded discussions around the issue of human resource development, labor force participation and supply and demand, the very important nature of competitiveness, diaspora, connectivity and remittance. And why do I pause here? Oftentimes we see our population only in terms of those who live within the borders of our shores. But Barbados has a very vast and robust diaspora around the world. And allow me to also pay kudos to our diaspora, whether they be in North America, in Europe, in the Caribbean, Latin America, Asia, Africa, Arab world. Because why? In addition to the remittances, of course, that families have been and continue to send to our country, it presents a major untapped, and I shouldn't say untapped because we've started as an administration to tap into it. And I know Senator King is actively involved with working with our diaspora, Minister Monroe Knight the same, so as to ensure that as we build out our policy space in the country, we tap into the significant skills that our citizens in Barbados continue to bring to bear, notwithstanding that they don't physically live here anymore, but their love and commitment to Barbados is a testament to where we need to go as a country and as a people. And why is this further important, Mr. President? Barbadians have left the shores in different pursuits. Oftentimes, and regretful, and Senator King and Senator Monroe Knight can treat to this one as well. Only this year, many Barbadians for the first time would have learned that this country produced not one, not two, but 3 presidents in Liberia. Barbadians have been in the business of going around the world and building new partnerships, new relationships, and building new skills, but that can help this country. And equally, Barbadians went to Panama and built the canal. The Carolinas, North and South Carolina, developed and founded by Barbadians. And bringing it now into the modern era, our population continues to do well in international organizations, in regional organizations, in the multilateral development space. What is the point I'm making? Our country continues to punch above its weight in every sphere of endeavor, not only within these 166 square miles that we have, but everywhere we go, carrying on their sleeves and their hearts the aspirations of a nation. And long may this continue. And I really want to use that point to also say to those in society who believe that the same way, and Mr. President, what is interesting, Mr. President, is the fact that when Barbadians do well around the world, every Bajan here is proud. Every Bajan here is proud. We are proud if they're doing well in sports, if they're living abroad and taking up a top position in a top Fortune 500 company, leading a world international organization, a sporting team. But therefore, Mr. President, Barbadians are, and we have to be equally on the reverse, not have an adverse reaction when persons come from around the world and come into our shores and enjoy the prospects that we have as a country. Because it can't be that we are proud to have our people leave and take up positions elsewhere in the world, but when persons from elsewhere in the world come here, we have a problem. We are not a hypocritical people, Mr. President. We are a people of honor and dignity and respect, and I'm happy that this particular debate and resolution is coming literally on the eve, some, 5.5 hours away from our 58th independence in this chamber. A chamber that historically none of us in here could have been here on the basis of our color, or on the basis, therefore, that we had no land, no property, no business. And therefore, we must now see this debate in the way that it must be crafted, that having come from the bosoms of 400 years of unfortunate and oppressive colonization, an independent nation, a republic nation, how do we now treat to the issue of where do we go for our prosperity and our further sovereignty in a way that our population must now anchor the success that we've hitherto become known to enjoy and to provide our people, whether that be providing free healthcare at the point of delivery. And note what I said, free healthcare at the point of delivery, because it is not free. It is not free. Someone has to pay. The taxpayers pay for it. Every taxpayer pays for it. Free education, as I said, free healthcare, all at the point of delivery. Public transport, subsidized by the government. Roads, all these things that we do as a country, providing sanitation facilities in terms of our trucks. And you know, we take these things, and perhaps, as I said, and why and I don't see this as a contentious bill, and that's my view. Because why? It provides us the perfect opportunity on the eve of independence just to use it also, not just to talk about the population, but to use it within that context to talk about where we go and how do we use this debate and independence to reposition our thinking on critical matters of our socio-economic development. And I go a little further, Mr. President. The discussions and consultations also focus on urbanization and the changes in population distribution, internal migration patterns, of course, land ownership and land use, which of course has been a major topic of discourse and debate in a previous discussion in this chamber. But we go on also, it focused on health factors and demographic changes, looking at the growth trajectory, of course, of the population within the confines of the demographic transition, issues of fertility and fertility changes, and the age structure, the health services, Mr. President, and the delivery of service, morbidity, mortality, and the epidemiological transitions. Importantly also, the consultations looked at the implications of population dynamics on social protection. Of course, we're talking about national insurance, etc., and the social arrangements of care. And it also focused on migration. I touched on it a little while ago. And in it, under that head, they looked at the CARICOM single market and economy and regional movement of people, international migration, the transitory population, and of course, perspectives on migration. Now, if I should touch very briefly, Mr. President and colleagues, on the aspect of regional migration. This country, particularly if you know your history, and I believe all those in public life ought to know the history of Barbados, particularly within the last 70, 80 years, and our interconnectedness and our forever link with respect to regional development. Lest we forget that it was our national hero, the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Adams, who was the first and only Prime Minister of the West Indies Federation, who led, at the time, the region into where it needed to go, notwithstanding the difficulties that pursued or ensued thereafter. But we fast forward to the 1980s, 1990s, where, given the leadership of Barbados within the context of the region, the regional bodies or leaders in CARICOM made it clear that, given the history of Barbados and its commitment to regional integration, that it would lead, under the revised Treaty of the Chaguaramas, the prime ministerial responsibility with respect to the single market and the economy. Why am I making that point? Grantley Adams and other leaders of this country thereafter, and I can go to Sir Harold Bernard St. John, Tom Adams, Errol Barrow, Owen Arthur, and now our current Prime Minister, Prime Minister Motley, have all made it very clear that this country that we call home cannot, and I repeat, cannot contemplate its future without a comprehensive appreciation, understanding, and connectedness with our brothers and sisters across the region. Cannot. And that should not be a debate. It should not be a political divide. Because why? Barbados does well when CARICOM and Caribbean does well. And it takes a significant level of political maturity, and certainly our party, the party of Grantley Adams, as I described, Mr. President, is very clear in our mind. It's rooted in our philosophy. And equally, historically, our country broadly has gone in that direction. Now, from time to time, Mr. President, there have been administrations that have unfortunately saw it fit to treat our brothers and sisters from some CARICOM and Caribbean nations less than fitting, and less, in a way, less than who we are as a people of Barbados. And let me go on the record to say, therefore, that all future generations of public figures and politicians in this country must never exercise on our brothers and sisters across the Caribbean, well, anywhere in the world, but in particular, our Caribbean brothers and sisters, treat them in a way that we ourselves would not want to be treated. But life has a way of sometimes correcting many, many wrongs. And that is why the good book says, Mr. President, if you humble yourself, I will exalt you. But if you exalt yourself, I will humble you. And luckily for us, we are part of a country right now led by Prime Minister Motley, who is providing stellar leadership, not just for Barbados, but for the rest of the region, particularly in the context of our prime ministerial portfolio on the single market and economy. And I make that case because why? if our population, if our prospects for trade and growth and development are to materialize in a significant way. We now have to use the CARICOM single market and economy in a way that we've not done. The policies are there, the framework is there, the treaty is there, the revised treaty is there. But let's ask ourselves, how have we unpacked all that have gone before us? Prime Minister Motley has and continues to make her contribution. We have a CCJ where our own Sir David Simmons was the champion of the CCJ. We have the institutions. Barbados is at the core of CARICOM. But in the context of a population discussion, ask ourselves, do we have an adequate population size? And I know this one continues to be one that is very dear to many people. Some people informed, many people uninformed. And I want for us to, as a nation, contemplate a future where Barbados serves as an anchor to the region, notwithstanding our small size, but a country that has the prowess economically, socially, underscored by strong social institutions in education, strong social institutions in terms of law and the rule of law, and institutions that provide for growth and development. And if our manufacturers, current and future to come, are to have markets across the region, they have to look to our region. Of course, you look further afield. But the question also is, how do we ensure that the movement of our citizens into CARICOM and our brothers and sisters into Barbados is a more seamless one where we can unlock our true potential as a region. And therefore, within the context of population, how do we ensure that as our population moves outside to tap into new areas of growth and development, that we also still have on the ground here in the country an adequate level of citizens and residents that can service our development and prospect needs. And therefore, CARICOM provides us also with that strategic buffer where our brothers and sisters can come with their skills and their families, not only to make up a number, but to add significant value to our country's development. Now, when you look at some of the general findings of the Population Situational Analysis Report, Mr. President, you would see a number of staggering figures, very staggering figures. And I want to encourage our country on our eve of independence and Republic Day to listen to these figures, and as they eat a nice conky tomorrow, ask themselves, how can we address some of these, yes, and conkies with raisins, how can we address these challenges? What are some of the challenges that the PSA yielded? Barbados has had a consistent decrease in birth and fertility rates since 1960. I repeat that, Mr. President, because it's quite staggering. Since 1960, Barbados has had a decrease in both its birth and fertility rates. Second of all, the fertility rate has been below replacement rate since 1980. Now, it's interesting that most CARICOM countries are facing similar declines in birth and fertility rates. Now, of course, there has been increases in the aging population and progression of large-sized cohorts to older ages. Equally, it also yielded that Barbados had one of the lowest population growth rates, namely 24% within the context of CARICOM between 1960 and 2018, which is some 6 years ago. And in 2018, Barbados had the highest population density, of course, in the CARICOM space. And interestingly, migration via the CSME has not significantly added to the population working age. Now I remember, and I use this last point importantly, because you would remember a lot of discourse, particularly in the 2000s, and I remember at that time, Senator Monroe, you were in CPDC, and on the vanguard of helping the region to usher through the context of the single market and economy. There was a lot of discourse, Mr. President, you may recall, where there was a fear of an influx of citizens from around the region into Barbados, because persons were saying we had this strong pull factor and that we were going to be overcrowded with citizens from across the region. The facts and the report has yielded that this is not true. Not at all. And as it is saying, that notwithstanding, of course, citizens from the region have come, it has not added significantly to the population working age. In other words, we still are woefully short of people to work here. Now, there are those who will say we have too many people on island, and that is not true. Because in a small society, if you see a lot of people, you think, ooh, there are too many. But in terms of our economic needs, our social needs, and I want to stress on the social needs, our social needs that we've enjoyed and that have been catered to over the last 40, 50 years have been met because of a population being able to service them in national insurance and everything in terms of education, etc. But because of this decline, we now have to correct a number of wrongs. And sometimes if you scroll through social media and you pick up our phones, we go on our tablets, you go on wherever, you hear the argument, how can we increase the population, but I already have 1 or 2 children? You hear the argument, Mr. President, the cost of raising a family is not the cheapest. You hear the arguments that you want us to get more children, where can we put them? And part of that conversation, funnily enough, is in this report. Because why? This also helps us to, as policymakers, understand the needs of the country going short, medium, and long term, and where we need to go in terms of housing, in terms of provision of education facilities. And equally, one of the things coming out of the report is that because of the situation where the population is not growing as fast as it should, there are more spaces also within our education system. I remember back in my time, and I'm still a young man, Mr. President, 25 years old. But seriously, when I was in secondary school, you would have, on average, plus or minus 30 students in a class. Now, on average, you're looking probably 21 or so. Because why? The drop in population is starting to manifest in a very real way. And I want to use that as a point of further reflection and departure. Because why? Because our people are not getting children at the rate that we would need to replenish our numbers significantly. And another way of putting this, the impact on the economy is tremendous. And why do I say this? They might ask, so then we need to get more children. But even if, Mr. President, and I've said this before in another place, even if all of us in this country tonight on the eve of independence had to try to contribute to solving this problem, we wouldn't adjourn just yet, Mr. President. If all of us tonight in this country, over a fine dinner and a Barbadian spirit, the oldest rum in the world, decided that we are going to put ourselves in a place to try to address this problem. 9 months from now, we would have a short fix in terms of numbers. But in terms of working age and contributing to the national insurance system and everything, that will take another 18 years for us to treat to the problem. Why am I saying that? We therefore have to find a solution now and in the medium term to reposition the country to be in a way to treat to this shortfall of a shortage on our population. Because why, as I said, and to make it in simple language, we have more people dying yearly than people that are being born. Very simple. And that is the challenge. So the question then becomes, how do we treat to it? Of course, the report also looked at the dynamic and the nexus between the population dynamics on infrastructure, as I said, on the labor force, the health sector. And the main findings are that over the next 30 years, the dependency ratio will grow to nearly 2 dependents per person of working age, Mr. President, with a higher presence of elderly dependents by the year 2050. So we're talking another 25 years, 26 if you add the extra month that we have for the rest of the year. Equally, care of elderly currently accounts for just under 20% of total health expenditure and is expected to nearly double its demand for financing. In other words, our population, now we're not getting higher births, but our people are living longer. And the question is, how do we now ensure that we have the amount of working population that can service the needs of our citizens and residents who are living longer, and therefore tapping into our national Social Security protection system, national insurance as we call it. This is a real conversation and contemplation that our people must go through. And one, then there's accepted an agreement here that the population is not growing as fast as it should. Two, we're not replenishing it in the way and at the rate that it should. And three, the births are not coming as fast as they should because our people are not engaging in that midnight run as they once did, perhaps in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. We now have to address this frontally. And perhaps I look forward to my good friend, Senator Walters, in guiding us through on how we can treat to this. I know Senator Walters, Mr. President, has made his contribution. I think I fall woefully short. I've only made one contribution to the overall number. I'm being advised by my leader that it is not too late. But in the lateness of the evening, Mr. President, I wouldn't want to engage in such activities. However, when we look, therefore, at housing, and we've looked at housing earlier, Mr. President, but because of the decline of the rate, notwithstanding, of course, there's a demand, significant demand for housing, for future population needs. Given where we are right now, there is adequate, and not adequate in its totality, but there will be adequate housing for the growth in population. And what is beautiful about this, and I want the population to cast their eyes to the Barbados Investment Plan 2035, because that plan outlines a clear roadmap as to the investment needs of the country, sector by sector, and the government is working to ensure that investment in housing is also matching the priorities with respect to where our population needs to grow. Because the truth of it is, and which brings me to this other part of my presentation, given the fact that we are not having enough births and we need people, we are going to have a real conversation as a nation, and that's why I'm so happy that this conversation is happening on the eve of our Independence and Republic Day. We have to have, therefore, a real conversation, having accepted that we have a low rate of births. We need people. And if Senator Rogers and those on this side, yourself, Mr. President, we've all played our part in some way or form, but it's necessary but not sufficient. We therefore have to look outward to bring in people into our country. And that is why also too, the strategy to engage our diaspora is so important. Mr. President, the diaspora is not just the first generation or second generation of Barbadians, but it is also a number of persons around the world who have their Bajan parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. And the government, of course, is looking to expand the areas and to see how far back we can go, because that unearths, therefore, a wider pool for us to consider. And a number of persons from the diaspora have contributed significantly to this country, both in and outward. And it's almost a sense of history and fate that, again, this debate is taking place within the context of the diaspora and population on the eve of our independence. Because tomorrow, Mr. President, would mark the 100th anniversary of the birth of a titan, a political force, a woman who has transcended every conceivable barrier that you can think of, a woman who was born in Brooklyn, United States, New York, United States, coming here at a tender age with her mother, who was a Barbadian, and lived with her grandmother. Who am I speaking about, Mr. President? None other than Shirley Chisholm. And tomorrow would be her 100th birthday had she been alive. And I want for us as a nation to forever give reverence to her for what she's been able to achieve, not just as the first elected woman to the United States Congress, but equally the first person to seek nomination in a major political party in the United States, who was an African-American woman, who was African-American and woman, who then led the way to open the door for many of the great political figures we now know. So before Hillary Clinton ran for president of the United States, of course, as a woman, there was Shirley Chisholm. Before Barack Obama became the first African-American to run for, well, to run and win for president of the United States, Shirley Chisholm paved the way. She did not win the presidential nomination, but she paved the way. So much so that one of his, meaning President Obama's, pursuits when he was president was to honor her formally as president for her contributions. And let me take the time to commend Prime Minister Motley and Minister Monroe Knight and Senator King and those in the Ministry of Culture and Foreign Affairs, the Prime Minister's office, who have been actively working around the clock to ensure that as we celebrate our anniversary of independence and Republic Day tomorrow, that of equal measure, the country is paying homage to Shirley Chisholm in a major way. We have a situation where members of the United States Congress, if they haven't landed already, are coming to Barbados. And they will be actively involved in our independence celebrations tomorrow on the 100th anniversary of the birth of Shirley Chisholm. And why do I say it with such pride, Mr. President? I have to say it. I went to the same primary school as Shirley Chisholm, the Vauxhall Primary School, now known as the Shirley Chisholm Primary School. I lived in the same neighborhood and still live in the same neighborhood as where Shirley Chisholm grew up, Vauxhall. And therefore, greatness can come from Vauxhall, Mr. President. But equally, on a more serious note, greatness has and can and must come from Barbados, notwithstanding our origin or economic class or whatever. She has left the template, and what's interesting, if you watch the movie that they did on Netflix and you watch the documentaries on her life, you go to the museums in Brooklyn and New York, you would see that Shirley Chisholm never lost her Caribbeanness, she never lost her Bajan accent. As a matter of fact, she spoke with eloquence in Bajan and in English with a Bajan accent. And she had deep political battles in the United States Congress, in the New York legislature, in a Bajan way. When you look at her, you can see some of the antics that a lot of our politicians in this country have. The sassiness, the class, the vigor, the robustness, some of the robustness that we see engaging in this house and the other place. And why is that important? Our population must give to the world. And Barbados must be a conduit and an environment, for people to thrive, people to go to the world and conquer. And not conquer in the traditional sense of our colonial past, but conquer in a way where we add value. And as in the words of Shirley Chisholm, we must be unbought and unbossed. No one must determine for us who we align ourselves to and what our foreign policy looks like, what it feels like. No one must tell us that notwithstanding that a hurricane is on your door every year, and there are climatic events that cause you to be on the front line of disaster potentially, that you should still support us pursuing a certain economic policy. On board and emboss also means domestically that notwithstanding that you might have political rumblings in your political party, that you should stand up to your leader if he or she, but in this context there's no she here, if he wants to gag you, Mr. President, and tell you you can't talk to Senator Blackman because he's on the other side, and the next time you talk to him, he can get you kick out this party. Yes, these things happen, Mr. President. So. Man, if you only know, Senator. If you only know, Senator. But anyhow, Senator, on the other side, we were talking another time. Ain't that time yet. We ain't gonna talk it today. This is a different kind of debate. I will address Mr. President, Senator Worrell another time. This debate today is a different one, unless I am pushing the other direction. But it provides for us the opportunity, truly, to, as we grow Barbados, Barbados must be that conduit for Bajans to prosper and to thrive. If you want to stay here, this country will provide the environment for you to thrive. If you want to go abroad, this must be the launch pad for you to launch out into the world, where you export Bajan excellence, Bajan ingenuity, Bajan everything. Just like how, for example, Sir Garfield Sobers, Rihanna, Prime Minister Motley, Rupee, you name it, John King, all of them, Alistair Hines, have done. Craig Braffett. Help me, cricket young lady. Haley Matthews. DeAndre Dotton. We have so many examples. You have Otis Gibson from Sion Hill in St. James, who not only played for Barbados, who not only played for the West Indies, but he was the coach of England. Right here in Barbados, we influence the world. And this is an independence message to our people, Mr. President, notwithstanding that this is population. Because why? We have to ensure that we influence the world. Vassmont Drake's another product from St. James. Continue to influence in a major way. Well, I can talk with Geoffrey Archer. Geoffrey Archer at Foundation. And he won a foundation, and Mr. President, you'll be equally proud as a fellow foundation alumni with me, where Geoffrey Archer, having gone to school in St. Philip, learned the cricket in the streets, in the road, at Hildeskeen, in the neighborhood, went on to foundation school, and then he went on to represent England and won a World Cup for England. Now, we may take these things for granted. I certainly don't. You have Jordan, what's his name? Chris Jordan. Yes, he went to the other school. I understand, I think Senator was his teacher? Exactly, I wouldn't hold it against him. Notwithstanding. Senator Morris was his teacher, but he did well. The point I'm making is, whether we stay here, Craig Braffett, of course, Kyle Mears, Jason Holder, Gordon Greenwich, Desmond Haynes, Collis King, Black Bessie Peter, of course. The point is, whether we choose to stay here in Barbados, Mr. President, or whether we choose to migrate temporarily or long-term, Bajans influence. But we must influence strategically and with humility. And therefore, when you look at the discussion on population increase and the urban sprawl, it also has implications for our coastal development. How are our migration patterns domestically also going to treat for planning in terms of where we build our houses, our hotels, our facilities of recreation? Because why? As Senator Cummins said in an earlier debate, Barbados' land is finite. Yes, we're a large ocean state, but how we plan to build our facilities, the population size will determine a number of things. And therefore, the context of both urban renewal and rural renewal is a very real thing that we must treat to. Now, when we look at some of the institutions that would have helped us in this front, I want to publicly commend, certainly as Minister for Economic Affairs, the United Nations Population Fund, who would have worked hand in hand at the onset, from the time they knew and they were approached by the government of Barbados in helping us to build out what we have here before us today. And let me place on record the government's appreciation to the United Nations Population Fund and their team at this time. And also the services of Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, who would have worked in a consultative capacity as well in helping us to build out, given his expertise. And the point, therefore, Mr. President, is that we are on the cusp of significant transformation. Yes, we have our debates from time to time in and out of this chamber, but every Bajan, irrespective of political divide, must be proud, in my view, and this is the view on this side, must be proud of where we're going as a country. But there's a major thing that can impede that prospect. And therefore, the policy goal of increasing the population size so as to sustain the levels of social care and productivity and labor force participation is critical. And second of all, providing Barbadians, and this is in the actual consultation that they had, providing Barbadians and non-Barbadians alike with the future opportunities for personal and collective growth. Thirdly, promoting integrated settlement development and safeguarding of ecological balance. Because why? As the population grows, yes, we admit that we need a population growing to further develop our country, but we must do so in a way that also balances our environmental and ecological footprint. Because why? A growing population uses more goods and services, and therefore equally how we treat to waste, how we treat to these types of things are key. And it would be very good for the country to also go online, go on YouTube, and look at how Singapore was able to increase its population and also balance its ecological footprint and the way forward, and having that balance so as not to harm the environment, harming the environment, but at the same time not retarding growth and development as well. And when we therefore look at the next step contemplated, we therefore come to the establishment of the intersectoral implementation group so as to develop the framework and support the implementation of this policy. And why is that key? The country, therefore, has to, as we move forward, have a number of things, including monitoring and evaluating the policy, the space, so as to ensure that we're meeting the objectives, targets. But I want to encourage Barbadians to take ownership of this. Yes, you're not part of the commission, but as citizens, active citizenship requires us to be engaged not only in once in 5 years or as called elections. It is beyond that. Our citizenship requires of us that active engagement on these critical issues. And I also take the opportunity, particularly for those in secondary schools, teachers as well, encourage you to have discussions and debates with your student councils on the issues of population growth and where do we go in the increase of our population demands and how do we do it and what does the future of Barbados look like in terms of infrastructure. So if you are a young engineering student at UE or you're doing sixth form in architecture or whatever, you should now be seeing yourself not just as a person who can draw a fantastic design or build a pier or build a bridge, but you must be contemplating as yourself as you sit before your table and seeing yourself as part of the future of this republic, trying to build infrastructure because you have to now find a way that you can build further housing, whether it be low income, medium income, or high income housing, to treat to the population trends. We have to reimagine our skill set, and how is that skill set going to be deployed in a new Barbados? If you are a nurse, ask yourself, how do you envision yourself as a nurse or a doctor in a Barbados where there are going to be persons from around the world that hitherto you may not have had to engage with their race or their whatever, that you now offer your skill set and you're constantly on the cutting edge of delivering healthcare to a new set of people. Because why? The truth is, as I said, Mr. President, we have to grow our population, and we certainly can't wait 18 years. And the thing is, the 18-year analogy that I used is assuming that everybody did this now. But it would really need midnight activities every day. And we both know in a finite population that is not possible. Because if I have engagement today, and activity yields in 9 months, to do that every day is not possible. So again, once I make it sort of a joke, it is true. We have to, and I hear the snickers, we have to have a serious thought process on how do we treat to this. One of the things that investors always look for, like any prudent investor or business person, Senator Walters can treat to this, is return on investment. You don't get into business unless you can see or contemplate where your return on investment is going to go. Senator Walters, I've said Senator Rogers, I think, sorry. Oh, okay, perfect. And one of the things that we've been blessed as a country, within the context of the region, Mr. President, Barbados has one of the relatively larger population sizes within the single market and economy. Now, of course, we have Jamaica, 2+ million, is that, you figure, 3 million, Lisa? Yeah. Trinidad, 1.9, I think, or just over 2. Bahamas, about 400,000. Guyana, about 600,000 to 800,000. So relatively speaking, we have a large population. And for our population size, certainly, for our geographic size, sorry, it's high, but it's not high enough. And the question then becomes, where are we going to go where there are shortfalls? Because as I said, it's not just Barbados. This study yielded that across the region, a number of our countries are grappling with the same issue. And certainly then, at the regional level, discussions certainly at quoted, the Council on Trade and Economic Development must be, and I'm sure they have already, these critical issues. How does the region now position itself? Because why, as I said, investors say, when I come to your country, how am I going to get my return? You can't outprice your goods and services, and therefore not relevant to the market. Because why? A lot of foreign direct investment and investors come from investors who are used to investing in markets of 200 million, 300 million, 60 million. On the lower end, 40 million, 20. You get the point, Mr. President. And therefore, a country of just shy of 300,000 people and a declining birth rate, how does the future of not just foreign direct investment, but business look like? And therefore, as a region, we have to, in my view, treat to this on a collective basis. And first of all, internally, there should be that freedom of movement that we've long discussed, where we can meet our needs. And to those who cannot fight the urge of xenophobia, I want to say to you, history has shown us that those who you relegated are now the fastest growing economy in the world. Humble yourself. And we have to learn that lesson. We have to learn that lesson. But equally, the government will continue, of course, to provide the space for our Barbados to thrive. But Barbados must also, as I said, see the world, Mr. President, as its playground, as it were, to use the phrase. I, in my own personal experience, leader of government business the same. When she would have gone to UK and Kenya, working not on behalf of Barbados, but on behalf of member states through the Commonwealth Secretariat, using the skills that she would have gleaned here and gotten here in Barbados, and at UE, and in Washington, D.C., when she served the mission there. And she then went on and moved from serving Barbados in an international context and further abroad. I too, similarly, did the same thing. Left this little rock, went to the UK, worked at the Commonwealth Secretariat, went to Geneva as our representative there, went to the ILO, and then served a broader global space, but still carrying my Bajan-ness and the flag of Barbados. And I want to encourage every single person in this country, that is now the republic that we must march forward and chart. Because this is not about saying I have a Bajan passport and I want to travel down to the islands and go and, buy a bus up shot and come back. No, fine, do that on a weekend. But ask yourself, how do you use your passport? How do you use your passport to see the world? Not just to shop and to travel and to go on Instagram and TikTok. That is good. But to use your passport and say, as a country with a strong passport, a strong education system, a global outlook, how can I now move through the world and influence the world, and to also use my God-given talent to help influence. And therefore, our population now must also help the country to bring in foreign exchange, technology transfer, and bring in some of those ideas into this country. And it provides for me, in my view, the basis on which the future of Barbados should look like. An outwardly looking, competitive and robust jurisdiction anchored by serious Bajan values, humility, even though, of course, our motto says pride and industry, so we are proud people, but that pride is not arrogance. The Bajan must not be arrogant. It should not be subservient. And we are not subservient to anybody. We are equal to anyone else around the world. And this population must be the population that can speak to social justice, both domestically and abroad. This population must be the population that can use its education system to find global solutions to global challenges, whether that be climate, infrastructure, health. Who better, Mr. President, than a population on the front line of the climate crisis to provide solutions for the climate crisis? So our universities must work hand in hand with our young people to find solutions for fighting the climate crisis. We continue to see innovative ways of climate finance coming from Barbados. The idea of the Bridgetown Initiative, which is a masterpiece of global advocacy for the reform of the International Financial Service, International Financial Infrastructure, sorry. We have to now use our ingredients that we've used for the last 58 years in a way, and I always say it, a simple Bajan analogy. For the last 58 years, we've been using our finite resources, which have produced a sweet bread. Our resources and ingredients have not changed, but we must now use those ingredients now to make either a rock cake, a currant slice, and reorder our ingredients. Because why? We're not blessed with large deposits of oil, gold, bauxite, aluminium, large landmass, waterfalls. But what we have, Mr. President, is a population that has access to free education at the point of delivery. And it is this administration who came in 2018 also correcting the wrong of not also when our citizens couldn't go to UE anymore. On top of that, we restored it and allowed for students, if they attain a first class, honors, or upper seconds, to get their master's what? Free at the point of delivery. We are building out the capacity of the country. And this country must now, again, have a global outlook. And I want to challenge every young person, particularly those between the ages of 15 and 18. And parents, I'm speaking to you as well. Everything your child now does has to have almost like a chart. One, how can I get this to do well in Barbados? Whatever it is, football, cricket, netball, you name it. How can I get this to do well in Barbados in the context of business? And the surplus of that success should be exported. So if you are producing golden apple juice and you're very good at it, and you start in Vauxhall, or you start in Sahel, or you start in Rockdando or Weston, you must now see yourself as exporting that across the region and the world. It can't only be that the people who manufactured Florida orange juice can export things to Barbados. True. We must get our population into the thinking of being exporters of world-class Barbadian goods and services. Imagine, we have, per capita, we don't only have the best cricketer in the history of the world, but per capita, nobody can touch Barbados. I love me to speak a little Bajan here. Nobody can't touch me when it comes to cricket. A fact. But how have we pivoted, in addition to the nostalgia and a few events here and there, how have we repositioned, just like how Brazil, and I know Senator King agrees with this one, but he's passionate about it. How have we repositioned our population, which churns out cricketers? The best cricketers in the world. Barbados is a manufacturer of cricketers. That's the best way I can put it. But how have we converted that into bringing that global track record, proven track record, and our Barbadian brand, and bring the world here to learn cricket? I'm not necessarily in a formal academy. You have to stand up and bowl like this. No. Look at Salt, Mr. President, from UK, England, who came down here and let me boat. Because why? He grew up here, playing at Harrison College. He knows the Bajan style of cricket. He didn't get into any formal cricket. Perhaps in his later years he did. But Barbados was that conduit and space that allowed for him to have that bravado. And it's notwithstanding he's on the wrong side, because I wish he was playing for West Indies. Sir? Bethel. Yeah. Yeah, and Bethel too. Ah, okay. Well, then thank you for the clarification. Yeah, Bethel grew up here. Okay, my correction. But the point is, that Bajan bravado allowed for him to now put some licks in us in our backyard. And notwithstanding that the licks were hot there, it is a model that we should be proud of. As I said, I go back to Otis Gibson, I can call names. Barbados. People should be coming here in a facility built to the state-of-the-art quality hotel and pools and training facilities in cricket. I envision a pitch in the middle, and you have resorts and villas around where people can come and rent and go and watch a cricket game and learning the rudiments of West Indian cricket and Bajan cricket. Brands. You have a situation where Elron Edie, Sergeant's Village, right next to Vauxhall, the primary school, the same Vauxhall primary school, now produces bats. I think it's called Trident, for a number of West Indies and Indian and cricketers from around the professional world, right there in Sergeant's Village. But again, how do we put that to scale and not a one-off? This population, Mr. President, is a population that is bursting with creativity, ingenuity, and resilience. Because let's face it, Barbadians have not had it easy over the last, not just 400 years, but coming down narrowly now, over the last, 50, 60 years. The global challenges have presented us with a number of obstacles. But that notwithstanding, irrespective of administrations now, our people have been able to rise above many of those challenges. Things are not perfect, but there's a Bajan resilience that allows for us to see the challenge and meet it head on. Not always perfect in the delivery, but we must now use our population. It's in our DNA. Irrespective of if you're African, or Indian, or white, Asian, once you are Bajan, born or adopted, this population must now be the population that helps to change the world. And in bringing it home, Mr. President, it's simply to say that when we look at the issue of managed migration, we're going to have a serious discussion similar to what countries like Canada and a number of them have done, a number in the European Union. Of course, larger populations, but we can scale it down. We're looking at some of the rudiments. Because why? Given the fact and reality that we've admitted our births are below our death rates, we need a growing population for us to, one, maintain and build on the quality of life that we've been accustomed to. We have to now look out, but in a managed way. It is not open your door and come. Equally, it is not, I don't want you both here. No, that is not the Barbadian way. It is a managed, orderly process determined by a set of criteria that is in the interest of Barbadians, short term, medium term, long term, but also in a way that we've been doing for years, being hospitable to people from around the Caribbean, the world. And therefore, as I close on this at this particular time, I want us to use this moment of independence to reflect, to take pause tomorrow as you go about your ordinary business, whether you're going to the parade, whether you're going to the beach, whether you're just staying home, you're reading a book. Ask yourself, how can this population of which you're a part of, and to the diaspora around the world, ask yourself, how can you contribute to not just sending remittances, but setting up of ideas, setting up companies here, sharing knowledge with students. How can the Barbadian landscape here and abroad, that's the point, help to reimagine what this country can do using our population to transform and to make the necessary change. And with that, Mr. President, I beg that this resolution be now passed.
Thank you very much, Senator Blackman. Speakers? Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. My prayers have been answered, and now I get to contribute to something that should be less contentious, at least from the perspective of the senators on the government side. Mr. President, the issue of the population size of Barbados, as presented in this document, this resolution, or this policy framework, is quite interesting, and it resonates with me because, Mr. President, I believe that, and I know it's a fact, that the economy cannot exist without people. And if you just for a second remove the focus on the migration or the increasing of the population from the report, you would see a significant focus placed on improving the livelihoods of Barbadians. If you let us not focus for a minute on increasing the size of the size of the population. And if you had reviewed the document, especially the goals and action plans, you will see that they have touched various areas in our society that will positively impact the lives of Barbados. And I spoke about this in the 2024-25 debate on estimates.